Hello, everyone. My name is Mahad Beg. I'm the current president of the Dow Research Society. And today I'm going to go over a little bit about how to create a questionnaire. Now, as you know, questionnaires are vital tools for a lot of our cross-sectional survey research, and they're very cheap and effective tools in order to gather information. And the great thing is if you use an online questionnaire, then it can even organize your data for you and even generate charts automatically as well. But for that, we need to know how to create a survey and how to start with creating a questionnaire. And the first thing that you need to keep in mind when creating a questionnaire is that you need to first create a consent form for the people who answer your survey. So for you to get IRB approval, you need to make sure that you create a consent form that very clearly educates the people responding to your survey that their data will be used. And so we're going to show you a template on what that should look like in a little bit. Besides that, another thing that you should keep in mind is that although it might seem at first like it would be better to create your own survey, your own questionnaire, the problem that we often run into is that in order to do that, you usually need to get that questionnaire checked to make sure that it is not manipulative in any way. And you need to get several sorts of agreements and approvals from different bodies. So that can take a long time and that can be a complicated process, which is why a lot of times professors will sort of advise you to use pre-validated questionnaires. And all that means is that it's a questionnaire that's already been published and that's available for other people to use. And we're going to look at one of those as well. The other thing is that you need to obviously then convert this into the Google Forms, and then you need to make sure that you format those questions correctly, which we'll all go over. Let's say, for example, our design is going to be about the correlation of ethnicity with the prevalence of depression, and let's add in medical students, right? So the first thing that we need to keep in mind is the reason why we said in medical students is because that's the population that's in our grasp for this example, right? And so then you want to think about, okay, if we're doing of medical students, how many medical students are there? How many do exist? There's a lot of medical students in this world, right? And we can't really reach each one of them. So let's limit it a little bit. Let's say medical students in Karachi. How many medical students are there in Karachi? Maybe more than thousands, right? So like thousands of medical students. Even that is very difficult for us to reach. But if we wanted to provide a snapshot of what the attitudes are of all the medical students in Karachi, then we need to be able to make sure that enough people respond to our survey so that we can confidently say that yes, the results of our survey represent the opinions of most students, at least in Karachi. And for that, we need to do some statistical calculations. Luckily, there are some online calculators that help you come up with the sample size, so you don't have to do it manually if you don't want to. You will just have to fill in the fields on that calculator. And one of the most popular calculators is Rao-Soft sample size calculator. And there are plenty of other calculators as well. And I can even show you guys. It's a little bit confusing what to put in there, but I recommend that you get help from your principal investigators for that, because honestly, statistics is not my forte. So besides that, once you come up with your target sample size, which is the number that comes out after you put in the information in the calculator, you will need to think about how to conduct a pilot study. Sometimes the IRB will ask you to conduct a pilot study. All a pilot study means is that you'll take a small percentage of your target sample size, which you calculated using that calculator app, and you will take 20% of that, and you'll run the cross-sectional questionnaire, whatever survey you've created on them, to make sure that your survey is built correctly and that the responses you're getting make sense and that it's going as you intended for it to go, right? The purpose of a pilot is to make sure that the questions are understandable and that the questionnaire is functional. Okay, so some minor edits are acceptable when you're copying the questions from the pre-validated questionnaire, and IRB will need an Urdu translation for at least the consent form, which we've discussed. And try to keep the questionnaires short to make sure that because that's the hardest thing, right, is to get people to respond to your survey. Even out of those people who respond and open the link, you want to make sure that those people complete the survey, and they're not going to complete it if the questionnaire is very long, okay? So let's start looking at some documents that we've created. So one thing that I've created for you guys is a template for some consent form, right? For a consent, when you guys start working on your consent forms for your questionnaire, you want to sort of follow a template like this, and I'll share this document with you if it helps you guys. You'll want to start with 2 paragraphs introducing your topic. So you need to make sure it's relatively brief. You'll introduce that, this is about depression, and depression is serious because of this, and it's especially prominent in medical students. And so therefore we are conducting the study in order to assess what other factors influence the rates of depression in medical students. Your participation in the survey will serve to provide us with data that will enable us to discover whether there is any association of depression with ethnicity, which will allow us to uncover some of the contributing factors of socioeconomic status to the prevalence of it, right? Something like that, something that's relatively easy for your audience to understand that will educate them about why you're doing the survey. This is all filler text that you need to make sure you insert, and of course the PI investigator's contact in case anybody has any questions or needs help. Okay, so you need to emphasize that it's voluntary and the responses are confidential. So try not to ask any questions in your survey that directly ask the patient's name. I would not recommend it. It makes things a little bit more complicated on the IRB side as well. And it also can influence the people responding because they're going to be worried about people judging them. So making it totally anonymous is always the best option. Don't ask anybody's name. So, and you don't even have to necessarily collect their email unless you want to. Okay, so that is the consent form. Now your consent form is out of the way. Let's look at the other step that we mentioned. And the other step that we mentioned was finding a pre-validated questionnaire. And in this case, we want to find one that assesses depression in a short, concise way. One of these scales that I've been able to search online is called the PHQ-9. This is a pre-validated questionnaire. As we can see here, it's used by many medical professionals and it's academically sound. It has been already published and it's available for any medical professional to use. And so we can use it as well because it's pre-validated, okay? This even shows you how it's graded at the end, all right? And how to interpret the results, which is very nice. And we're gonna need that as well. Of course, if somebody goes through this and they get enough points to qualify for any of these levels of depression, it does not necessarily mean that we can diagnose them with depression. Only a medical professional can do that, and only a medical professional who has done the complete evaluation of the patient can actually make that assessment. So we need to make sure that we clarify in our elaboration of these findings that we're not diagnosing people with depression here. What we mean by the prevalence of depression is really just to see how prevalent the signs of depression are, for example. And we can even modify the title to reflect that. Prevalence of depression symptoms, right? So then what we need to do is we need to take these questions and we need to move them over to the Google form. Before we do that, we need to think about a few things. How is the data going to be collected? When we move these questions into a Google Forms, and the Google Forms starts asking us to type in like the different multiple choice options, when people type them in, we're going to have a lot of responses, right? You might have even 400 responses if you really work hard and you're very lucky. You don't want to have to go and count up every single of those 400 responses to see which category of depression they fall into, right? So you need to think about how are you going to use Google Forms software to collect that data for you so that you're not overwhelmed with it later. So once you go here and you open this Google form, you'll reach a page that looks like this. So the first thing that you want to do on this page is that you want to title it, obviously, right? So this is our title. I've already filled this out, but I'm going to get back to this after I explain to you guys how to just at least set it up. This is our title. I put in my title here, okay? And the first question that we want to ask them is not even really a question. We need to take their consent first, right? So the way that I like to do this in order to make sure that the format is right is just to insert a picture or a screenshot of the consent form that we've typed, right? So I've already taken the screenshot and I'm just going to insert it here to show you guys how to do it. Upload, and then it'll upload the consent form screenshot. And you'll make sure that you crop it and make it look nice and readable, okay? And make sure that the text is big enough for people to read. So then it should come up and you should have the picture that looks like this, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to provide these options. It says checkboxes over here. Make it multiple choice. You don't want people to, checkboxes mean that they can choose multiple answers. You want to make sure that they only choose one answer. So agree, disagree, okay? You can make it different if you want, but this is roughly how it is, okay? Then what you want to do is you want to add a section, and I'll show you guys why we need to do this, okay? So now that we have our consent form and we have agree and disagree, let's go over here and let's click on these three buttons and go to section based on answer. If somebody presses disagree, you don't want them to complete the survey, right? Because if they disagree, then their answers will not be able to be used by you. You have to throw out their answers because they did not consent to be a part of this study. So you're gonna click on those three dots like I showed you. You're gonna go to section based on answer after you make the extra section. And if they press disagree, then you're gonna go to section 1. And go to section 1 is ethnicity and depression medical students. It's right up here. So what that will do is that if somebody presses disagree, then it'll just show them this screen again. And you can put in parentheses here, please close the window or something like that, right? If they press agree, then it'll go to the next section, which is where our questions will start, okay? PMH, whatever, questionnaire, okay? So that's how you'll make sure that everybody who answers your survey are those people who have consented to take the survey. And that's how you make questions, is that you just press the plus button here, okay? So that'll make another question, all right? And this is where you type in the question text, okay? So that's the basics on how you set up the survey and how you make the consent form. What I want to show you now is how to do the rest, okay? So the first section should ideally really be about demographics, okay? So we can even, instead of making this questionnaire, go demographics. All right, so in your demographics, you're gonna ask them, obviously, their demographics. What is your ethnicity in this case? And what you want to try to avoid, so don't do this by just pressing short answer, because then somebody will write Balochi with a capital B, somebody will write Balochi with a lowercase b, somebody will write Balochi and it'll be spelled wrong or something, right? And you need to make sure that everybody who is Balochi types the same question choice, because eventually you're going to have to compile this data, and it makes it a lot easier if you make sure that the questions are listed here and that they just choose whichever one is easy. There's various different styles here that you can play around with. I'm not going to go over each one of them, otherwise the video will be way too long. But this is just essentially how you sort of make these questions. Gender is a pretty standard question. You can also ask age if you want, and medical school year will also help. Make them according to the objectives of your study. The reason why we ask these things is that, you know, even though we didn't talk about this in our objectives, like what if we discover that males and females generally have, you know, significant differences in the rates of depression by themselves, right? So we need to take that into account. Or what if the year of medical school that you're in influences that, right? We need to know that. So then we can create another section, which we did by clicking this button and titling it here like this, PHQ9, which is the name of this survey. And what we've done here is we've written, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by any of the following problems? And that's how it's written up here, right? Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? And then we have all the items here, okay, next to all these options, which is how we did it here. And we made sure that everybody reading this does not skip over this part, so they know what they're talking about. And you're looking at this and you're like, oh, this is interesting. I've never seen this. What is that? That's a linear scale. When you click linear scale, then it'll allow you to customize like up until what number this goes up into, right? And that's why we've written it up here. And this helps because it again restricts the kinds of answers that people can give, and it allows the data to be organized, okay? And all of our questions are organized like that, which is very nice because once we get all these responses, hundreds of responses, it'll be a lot easier for us to manage. Right now, I've just written 3 of them just to show you how it goes. You can also go multiple choice and do it, multiple choice, and then write, you know, not at all, several days, etc., right? But the problem with this, in this case, okay, is that we need to grade this, if you remember, okay? Because depending on what option people chose, they're going to get a different score here. And according to that score, we're going to see how severe their depression is. So this is not the best way for us, because if people select whatever option they want, then we're going to have to go manually and fill out and try to calculate for each response, each one of those hundreds of possible responses, what their total score is. So that's why this linear scale method actually helps us. If you convert this to 0 and convert this to 3, okay? Then make this not at all, and then make this nearly every day. Okay, so that was my reasoning for why I choose the linear scale for this situation. Okay, this is the basics of your questionnaire. Some other things that you should keep in mind is that you always want to make sure that this is on required. You really want to make sure that people are not able to skip over your question because they will. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So you need to make sure your questionnaire is foolproof, okay? The other thing is that you can, let's see, what are some important things? Okay, and I think I showed you guys how to upload the photos here as well. You can customize this however you want. You can play around with those features. The other things that I should go over with you guys is the settings. You can make it a quiz depending on what other kinds of surveys you're doing. And if you make it a quiz, you can even assign point values for different questions if you wanted to. All you do is after you do that, you press refresh to make sure it catches up. After you refresh, it should allow you to modify the answer key. Okay, so this is not what we're going to do for this one because it's not related to our objectives, but I'm just showing you how to do it just so that you guys know really quickly. If my thing would load. Okay, so answer key, and then we're going to select which one we're going to say is the right answer. Okay, whatever. And then we can even write feedback here, but that's not the goal of most of our surveys. So, but I just wanted to show you guys how to do that. Okay, let's go back to surveys, turn off, make it a quiz. It's not a quiz. Okay, responses. You can collect email addresses if you want. I would not recommend it because it makes it harder for people to fill out the form because sometimes they're not signed into their Google accounts and that can cause a lot of confusion. So instead of doing it here, you can make a separate question about collecting their email addresses if you want to and just make it not mandatory. But in general, you don't need that, okay? Allow response editing, keep it off. I would say limit to one response, keep it off because it requires them to sign in and that can cause a lot of complications as well, okay? Show the progress bar, I would recommend to keep it on because it makes people more motivated to complete the survey. This is the message that's going to appear after your survey. If you want to show them any extra links or something, then you can type that in here. Type in the links or any messages here. Link to submit another response. For the integrity of our survey, we can keep this off so that people don't just submit another response on accident or just to help you like buddy. But for just this, yeah, we'll keep it off, okay? So result summary, keep it off because this means that everybody else will be able to see as soon as they complete the survey, they'll be able to see all the results and you don't necessarily want that. Okay, so rest of the defaults are pretty self-explanatory and you guys can figure that out on your own. Yeah, make required by default. The next thing that we're going to talk about in the next video is how to analyze the data. Okay, one thing that I want to show you right now, just as a quick glimpse, is the reason why we love Google Forms is that it actually sort of makes some graphs already for you and a summary of these results. Okay, so you can see I've already just gone through myself and put in 6 responses randomly, and you can see everybody accepted. What is your ethnicity? We have the breakdowns of the ethnicities here. What is it? Genders, medical school year. Okay, so it even makes these nice graphs for you. Okay, the other thing that it does is it can auto-generate an Excel spreadsheet, or well, not Excel, but a Google spreadsheet called the Google Sheet. You'll press create new sheet, and in the same folder where you created this survey, it will create a document for Google Sheets. And we're going to go over in the next video how this helps us analyze the data. But for now, these are the basics on how to create your questionnaire. All right, thank you.